So thank you. I'm Dennis McCarthy. Thank you very much, everyone, to be here. I love anti-Stratfordians and I love Oxfordians. Just for all the information that they have gathered, for having the courage to believe that there was something up with Shakespeare, and I think we agree on a lot of things. And I've always been moved by a lot of your writings, and not kowtowing to authority. If this were normally a more orthodox audience, I'd be talking about that. Yes, Shakespeare adapted old plays, and you showing all the people that conventional scholars accept this, and there's the Hamlet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's an early Romeo and Juliet. There's an early Merchant of Venice. There's Titus and Vespasian, which June Schluter and I published. June Schluter, my co-author, my better half, as I like to say. She's at Lafayette. We published this in Shakespeare's Survey, which is just showing that Thomas North was the original author of Titus and Vespasian, which is the source play for Titus Andronicus. And then he wrote it in 1561. And again, as Michael had said, in order to discourage the queen from marrying a Goth. And if there's any work in the history of the English language that warns you about marrying Goths, it's Titus Andronicus. All right, at sirthomasnorth.com, we know that there are all these early versions of the plays. Everyone knows this. And here are at sirthomasnorth.com, here are some of the reasons why I believe that Thomas North is the original author of those source plays, the smoking guns. In fact, the smoking cannons, and what I call a smoking thermonuclear bomb. My background, science, and so I'd first like to discuss forensic linguistics to show that what we're doing here is not just in terms of what the plagiarism software and the passages we're finding it's not just subjective, it's not art, it's actually science, and and it's probability analyses, and you can determine with certainty whether two passages are related. The entire world, and particularly the United States, in 2016 became aware of forensic linguistics when Melania Trump's speech at the convention seemed to be very similar to one of Michelle Obama's. You can establish links between texts to a greater certainty than that provided by DNA evidence. Megan McCarthy wrote an article and also discussed forensic linguistics, noting that as few as 7 words, if you type them in, any 7 words from your own work, you search them in Google with quotation marks, that you'll produce 1 hit, your work. And she writes, and I'm not talking about elaborate sentences. I'm talking about boring fragments and I'm not talking about elaborate sentences. And she noted that it was not in Google right now, and that after she publishes the article, it will be in Google. And this is really an astonishing thing. Most strings of, say, 7 words are either unique or have been borrowed. So hitting the linguistic lottery and passages that are together is even much less likely than hitting the numerical lottery that we're all used to. It's mind-boggling less likely to match a 7-word string by coincidence than to hit Powerball. And I mean much less likely. And again, we've seen that a lot of scholars know that the Roman plays are based on Thomas Norris, Plutarch's Lives, but very few people have seen in Norris chapters, very few people have really looked at how much. It's curtain to curtain. And these aren't really original plays. As a Henry V, which is based on Holinshed, Hall is an original play, and there's all sorts of original speeches, and there's original characters in it that aren't played, and a lot of the things is new. Same thing with Hamlet, which you take a bare outline and you create this entire new masterpiece filled with new characters and ideas. And with Coriolanus and Antony, Cleopatra, and to a lesser extent Julius Caesar, this really isn't the case. It's just passage after passage after passage. This is not just a case of influence. It's just borrowing after borrowing. And very few people look at this and stop and really analyze all the words. Even the top speeches are in, the best speeches in Antony Cleopatra, in Coriolanus, and this includes Volumnia's, and this was not normal for the time, this is what people say. Well, maybe the author was quoting Amiot, the source that North used, but we can see that a lot of times in the passages that were borrowed for the Roman plays, Thomas North had already started rewriting them. You see this, this is the French version of Amiot is on the left with the Google Translate. And you can see that the red, which is all new, this is all new stuff from Thomas North. And that's really what was borrowed in Shakespeare's Coriolanus. It just shows you that it's necessarily Thomas North, but it also shows you that Thomas North is starting to rewrite the passage. You find the same thing with many of the passages in Cleopatra. The first scholars to discover this were absolutely shocked and noted, quotes like this: "It has been well said that in North alone among his sources, Shakespeare met his match. He's not succeeded in bettering his original. That was Schmeling. This is Tucker Brooke, says the same things." These passages, all of which rank, because they're talking about the speeches, and this is what shocked them. That because when you look at other source works, they're not borrowing full speeches, especially the ones that are dramatic and moving, as George Wyndham, who declared Norris Plutarch Lives one of the three greatest works of prose in the English language, and notes that the Antony and Cleopatra, the fifth act, which he considers one of the greatest acts of Shakespeare, that Shakespeare has not transcended his original, which was Thomas North. I always say, if you're looking for the person who wrote Antony and Cleopatra, how about the guy who wrote Antony and Cleopatra? What I've just shown you with the Roman plays was clearly open book writings. The playwright has Thomas Norris, Plutarch's Lives open. He's creating a play out of it, scene by scene, all the characters, all the speeches. But when you're writing, a lot of times you're not just plagiarizing your past work. A lot of times you'll just recall it. And this is what authors tend to do, especially when they're writing about the same subject. We also find this, not only do we have passages, we also have in which the playwright is clearly borrowing from Thomas North verbatim. We also have the playwright is able to recall everything North has written. And I mean everything. So we have this, which is a passage, and this is not disputable. The person writing Othello is able to recall, for example, this is from the prologue, when Iago gives a speech on the thief of reputation, who steals, does worse than a thief of the temporal goods. It's clearly coming from the dial, which is saying the exact same thing. And even there's a quote at the end, "But he that robbeth me of my good name walketh before my door." In other words, he that steals my neighbor's gown, he's hanged, but he that robbeth me of my good name walketh still before my door. And that's exactly what Iago says. It talks about the temporal goods that are not really worth much, but he that filches from me my good name robs me of. And so that's, but he that from my good name robs me of, both of it have there. Not a coincidence. The author's writing Othello, and he doesn't have the Dial of Princes open next to him. There's no source story in Dial of Princes for him to follow. Has nothing to do with Othello. He's just recalling the passage. When you look it up and you try to find it on Google anywhere, it's nowhere. We know these are unique lines, and we know that's where it's coming from. You look it up on early English books online, just look up, "But he that near my good name, let alone robs me of," and all you get is Norris Dial of Princes and Othello. Clearly, the author of Henry VIII is able to remember this passage at the end of Norris Dial of Princes on page 714, in which the exact same thing is said, in which the elder gossip defends himself. "Most gracious sir, please you to declare whether ever I spake one the least word that might be to the prejudice of her present state." Now, no one, word that might be to the prejudice of, we talked about 7-word strings before, that's an 8-word string. No one in the history of the English language has ever said that line. We don't find it on early English books online. We don't find it anywhere on Google, except for these two authors. It is clear that these passages are related. The playwright will even be able to borrow from Thomas North when he's borrowing from Thomas North. So this passage, the gardener scene in Richard II, he's able to recall not just a passage in Plutarch, which is clearly the origin of this, about the fatness and lustiness of the soil, which bringeth forth both wholesome herbs and noisome weeds. And this is about commonwealths are like gardens. which is exactly what is said in the gardener's scene, referring to noisome weeds and wholesome herbs and the soil's fertility. And it's comparing commonwealths to gardens. And then there's a passage in the Dial comparing children to fruit trees whose superfluous branches must be cut off before their fruits are enjoyed, before you gather their fruits. And that's exactly their fruits, superfluous branches. That's exactly what is said in that same scene. So he's able to recall two different passages. Everything that Shakespeare ever wrote shows a profound and persistent fluency with everything North ever wrote. Now we need smoking guns and holy grails. The Holy Grail, if you're an anti-Shakespeare reporter, you think there's something to discover of Shakespeare, would be a unique manuscript that no one has ever discovered before, or it's some sort of work in which no one knows about, and it's important to Shakespeare scholars, and it's an important source for the Shakespeare canon. We've done that 4 times. Michael Blanding talked about the George North manuscript, the cousin, written in 1576. This made the front page of the New York Times, thanks to him, but then it made news reports all around the world, India, China, everywhere. Of course, all over England, but France, Italy. And there's only one copy. There's no known copy. It's written in the hand of the person. It's a holograph, which means it's written and signed by the author himself, and it was dedicated to Roger North. And for all we know, it never left the library. It's kind of a locating device. And the reason I found it is because I was looking for such a manuscript in the North Family Library. Thomas Norris Journal, which is a significant, and it helps you explain Winter's Tale for the first time and Henry VIII. That's the second manuscript. And let me just play a little here. January 15th, 2021 marked the release of Thomas North's 1555 travel journal, From Italy to Shakespeare. The authors contend that North used the experiences he documented in his travel diary to help him write early versions of his very first plays, Henry VIII and The Winter's Tale. In fact, the scenes are so rare that it appears no other known work in history also juxtaposes a detailed description of a cardinal procession with the seating arrangements of a consistory, except for Shakespeare's Henry VIII. This is a just believe your eyes moment. The passages are clearly related. Just notice the phrases introducing each row of marchers: after them, next them with, then, after them. Consider the first section. The 2 vergers with silver wands corresponds to the 2 officers with silver rods. A mitre is a bishop's hat, which links to the cardinal's hat. Note carrying each of them and bearing each. Both have follows or followed. Finally, then introduces the cross, being borne before cardinals. Here's the next section. After the crosses comes the pillars. Although North uses borne before himself while the playwright uses bearing, in an earlier stage direction, the playwright even writes cardinal borne before him. Finally, both works also describe a consistory with the lords in the court. Both focus on the seating arrangements with the Pope or King in a high chair in the center and the cardinals and bishops underneath them and on the side. This is where we get into smoking guns, real smoking guns, because North's journal is necessarily linked to these scenes in Henry VIII. But is it possible that Shakespeare got a hold of this diary and then tried to reproduce North's experiences? No. We have proof that this can't be the case. Before North compiled his writings into the extant journal, he used 3 history books to help him add information to his entries. These are the citations for some of the passages that North used in the diary, and these are also the exact same source passages used in Henry VIII. And this last part is well known. Scholars and editors have long recognized these passages as the original inspiration for various scenes in the history play. It is just that no one ever knew that North had first used these passages for his journal. Even assuming Shakespeare had access to North's journal, he couldn't possibly know what source passages North had used to help him write his entries. What was important about that, this is the actual passage. No, people are not juxtaposing descriptions of a consistory with descriptions of a cardinal's parade. This is as cut and dry a forensic linguistic case as there can be. And it's not just the descriptions, it's the adjectives that started after them, next them with, etc., before them. and it's exactly the same descriptions. And even if you want to argue that someone got a hold of Norris Journal and wanted to reproduce for some reason his experiences, this fails because of this. And this is what I want to just to make sure we get clear. North, being the scholar, when he was 20 years old, writing this journal, used history texts to help him write the entries of his journal. And the entries that he used, the history text he used is Cardinal's Life of Wolsey and Hall's Chronicle. Those are the two sources for Henry VIII, the seminal sources. Now they'll say Hall or they'll say Holinshed, but they agree and they know that Hall and Holinshed are borrowing from Life of, or they'll say Holinshed, they agree are borrowing from Hall or Life of Wolsey. They know not only that, it's these passages from these pages that are used in Henry VIII that North originally used in North's journal. So there's just zero way. And so you not only have to have someone getting North's journal, if you don't want it to be Thomas North who wrote the stage direction, they would have to somehow know what the passages are that he used. There's no way this is a coincidence. This is over. This is science. This is facts. This is DNA evidence. There's no way that the playwright wrote this without looking at Thomas North's translation of Nepo's Lives. It's about grief of the inward soul, seeing things through water, and dissolving the bands of life. That's over, and that's published in 1602. North doesn't publish it. Richard II is published in 1597. The person not only has access to the George North manuscript, not only has access to Thomas North's journal, has access to Nepo's Lives before North publishes it. And it's 5 years earlier, and that's all impossible. And now we've got on top of that, the fourth, Thomas North's marginalia. Here's some of the lines that are used in Richard II. This is Michael Blanding found Antigonus, which is a story involving a raging and roaring bear and at the Isle of Sicily, where he's banished, and a doomed daughter, and the clamors and cries, and the cries raging, and he's marking it in his own work. Here's the description of sorrow used for Romeo and Juliet, and as Michael noted, he's underlining the very subtitle that he's going to use in Art of Feversham. And we can keep going and going and going. And one of the main facts is, and one of the more important and significant things is, that not only do we have Norris passages all throughout the canon, not only do we have Norris passages from works he has not published again and again and again, they all come together at the right time with the moments of his life that are also in the plays. That's Thomas North's sister, Alice Arden, which she's circling the subtitle to the tragedy about his sister that's published that year. It's his 1592. That's when he gets the book. He gets the book in 1591. He's filling it out in 1591 and 2. One of the passages is marked 1592. This comes out in 1592. And there's all sorts of other passages in it as well. Here he underlines, if the fear of God's and speech of men. We can do this year by year by year. He went on his journey back in 1555, and that's what he wrote the journal that links to the events and passages of Henry VIII and Winter's Tale. The events and passages of Titus Andronicus, Titus and Vespasian is 1561. And we can keep doing this year by year by year. When Thomas North starts writing Plutarch's Lives, now all of a sudden Plutarch's Lives starts appearing in the plays. And it's just passage after passage after passage. We have this 6 ways to Sunday. I invite people to jump on board. And the first people that do are going to be heroes, and will have my gratitude. But I think that's it. I think I'm done on that. And I will be happy to take any questions.